Many of today's latest vehicles are coming standard with a larger touchscreen head unit. But what if we have an older vehicle with a smaller standard-sized radio? How can we add a large 10.1-inch touchscreen that gives us wireless CarPlay and Android Auto, but also improves upon even the newest factory head units? What if we had full adjustability for a better viewing angle? What if we could also play high-resolution music files, while also giving ourselves RCA pre-outs to use for easily sending signal to aftermarket amplifiers if we seek additional system expansion? And what if we could do this in a way that would allow the new head unit to communicate with the data signal of the vehicle, allowing us to retain factory OEM features that you would normally access through the factory head unit, and also retain things like steering wheel controls on qualifying vehicles? Well, this can all be achieved by Sony's new XAV-AX8500 digital multimedia receiver. Let's take a look at the specs, do an unboxing, and dive into all the fine details with a full install. Before we kick this off with an unboxing, let's first talk specs. This head unit is going to give us 4 channels of powered output, 20 watts RMS or 55 watts peak. As one would expect, this has an AM/FM tuner. This is also Sirius XM ready, but a quick side note, you do need a sold separately tuner, and you of course have to pay the subscription for that. Single DIN installation is possible, or you can use a double DIN installation with a filler plate. This has 5 volt preamp outputs, which is great if we're installing additional amplifiers to power our system. Also, Bluetooth 5.0 wireless connectivity along with Apple AAC and Android LDAC Bluetooth protocols for quality streaming. And arguably the most important feature right here, this has Apple CarPlay and Android Auto built in, and you can make that connection wirelessly. Now, with an advanced piece of technology like this, there are of course a ton more details and specifications to look into, so if you're interested in those, check out that link down in the video description. But for now, we are going to kick off our unboxing. Open up the top here, and we will slide this out. So first off here, they've given us a manual and information on the warranty. In this compartment here, we have the GPS antenna, the microphone that we can use for hands-free calls and voice prompts, some assorted fasteners to secure the head unit to our fit kit along with a couple of zip ties. These are some rear panel covers to kind of trim things out on the back side of the head unit. And then of course a variety of different wiring connections. These are going to be your different camera connections along with your RCA line level outputs to your aftermarket amplifiers. Typical constant power and 12 volt ignition along with ground, along with all your different speaker outputs from the head unit. And a few other wires, of course, parking brake connection, speed sense. We're going to talk more about the details on this in a few minutes. They've got a USB extension cable. This is a USB Type-C. And this cable here is for steering wheel controls. That way we can retain them in our vehicle. Removing this top piece of packaging material, we can get to the screen itself. With that packaging material removed, here is our 10.1-inch screen. And taking a look at the back side here, you can see that we have all sorts of adjustability. Again, we'll talk about this more in detail in a few minutes. The final component in the packaging here is the brain of the head unit itself. Here's the wire connection for the screen along with the physical mounting points for the front screen. And if we flip this over and look at the back side here, you can see all of our different wiring connections. Now this screen here is absolutely beautiful. I'm really excited to see it installed and see how its display looks, but for the time being, to protect it during installation, I am going to put this protective cover back on. Now, something very important that I noticed right away about this floating screen out of the box is the amount of adjustability it has for adjusting the screen position. First off, on this screw here, you can see that can go in 3 different spots, allowing us to adjust the installation angle of the screen. But here's what's really cool, even once you do pick a position for the angle, you still have some more angle adjustability. Once we get this installed into the vehicle, we're definitely going to have to look at all those different ways that we can adjust this just by pushing on the screen. But for the time being, you have that adjustment. You also have front to back adjustment, so how far this sticks out of the dash in relationship to the brain. By removing these screws here, we also have some left to right side adjustment, and then we also have some up and down adjustment with these ones here. All of these different adjustment points are going to allow us to perfectly position this screen exactly where we want it, and Sony has done a really good job engineering this design, because what's cool is we can actually physically mount the brain unit into the dash, and since this is just a plug style connection, we can easily unplug the screen. We can make all the adjustments that we need, plug it back in, test it, make adjustments, plug it back in, test it, and once we're ultimately happy with where this is positioned, what we can do is then attach the final mounting screws. Now I do want to take a closer look at the backside of this brain unit as well. By looking at the backside here, we're going to see all of the system expandability options for this head unit. First off, with this wire harness here that plugs in right here, we have a variety of different connections. First off, there's front left, front right, rear left, and rear right RCA line level outputs. If we're expanding our system with aftermarket amplifiers, these can be used to send signal to them or to other things like digital signal processors. Additionally, there's also a subwoofer output that could be used for a subwoofer amplifier. Now you also have 3 different camera outputs. One of these is going to be used for our reverse camera, but you could also have a left and right camera for looking at the back left or back right or other camera locations in your vehicle. For those 2 additional cameras, there are some trigger wires that will turn that feed on. Now this port here is going to cover all of your typical wiring connections, and then next to it is a connection for the Sirius XM tuner. Above that is a USB Type-C connection so that you can send digital audio files into this device. Also an HDMI connection for sending in video, an antenna connection for your AM/FM radio, a microphone connection for this microphone that we mentioned earlier that allows us to do voice prompts and have hands-free calls. This port here labeled remote allows us to make connections so that we can retain the use of our steering wheel controls in qualifying vehicles. The GPS connection is of course for the GPS antenna. And then finally, these 2 ports here are for an iData link connection. And what that is that's a separate brain box that allows our aftermarket head unit to talk to the data signal in the vehicle. For newer vehicles, I strongly recommend looking into getting one of these. Oftentimes it is required for newer vehicles. And what that's going to allow you to do is to control a lot of the factory system parameters that you were able to control with the factory head unit. So while the XAV-AX8500 could be installed easily into older vehicles, for newer vehicles you're commonly going to need a few additional parts. Like I just mentioned, in layman's terms here, the Maestro is a brain box that is going to allow your aftermarket head unit to talk to the data signal of your vehicle. And since we're using a Sony head unit, this T-harness adapter allows us to easily make connections between the 2. And finally, you're going to need a vehicle fit kit, which is going to allow you to physically mount the aftermarket head unit into the dash of your vehicle. In the case of the iData Link Maestro fit kits, this also includes the vehicle harness connections, so these plugs here plug into the actual vehicle connections themselves. Now, if you've never installed an aftermarket head unit, I know that this can seem overwhelming, but it's actually pretty simple if you guys just check out a website called Crutchfield. On the Crutchfield website, you can enter the year, make, and model of your vehicle, and that's going to allow you to determine exactly what parts you need to install the Sony XAV-AX8500. I can't stress enough how helpful it is to have these kits here to install your aftermarket Sony head unit. As an example, this is the wiring harness that came with the head unit, and there's a few connections here that you would have to make. But if we were to get this kit here, remember this harness that I showed you guys earlier, rather than needing to wire all of these connections, this harness here allows us to simply plug into the vehicle harness from this kit, and now our vehicle's wiring harness here is essentially plug and play with the back of the head unit. So again, if you need to determine exactly what parts you need to install your aftermarket Sony head unit, I'll put a helpful link for you guys down in the video description. Installation of the XAV-AX8500 is going to vary depending on the vehicle, but there are a few general things that you have to do regardless of the installation. The first of which I'm doing on screen right now, which is mounting these mounting brackets for the fit kit. And then of course, you're going to need to make all of the plug connections on the wire harnesses and on the back of the unit. After removing the stock head unit and plugging the new wire harnesses into the vehicle's wiring, I mount the head unit brain in the dash. And now I can go through the process of setting the initial adjustments to position of the screen. Once I find the location I like, I can attach the mounting screws to secure the screen in place. Now before we power up for the first time, I cannot stress enough how helpful it is to have all of that adjustability when it comes to mounting this screen. When you're installing an aftermarket head unit, you're commonly going to have climate control knobs or volume control knobs, different buttons that you're going to want to access on the vehicle's bezel, so having the ability to adjust this screen and position it exactly where we want is really helpful. And again, don't forget, like you just saw me do, we do have some manual adjustability once this is mounted as well. You can tilt backwards and forwards, and you can also rotate from side to side. I really like this, that even in my driver's position, I can angle the screen like this and be looking directly at it. So now let's power up the vehicle so that we can do a feature overview. So here we have it, guys, the Sony XAV-AX8500. So I've had this head unit installed for a few days now so that I had time to play with it and learn all of its features. And one of the things that I noticed right away is how responsive the screen is. Any button that you select selects the first time. You don't have to push the screen very hard at all. I find it to be extremely responsive to touch. The other thing I noticed right away is how quickly the data signal of the vehicle communicates with the head unit, and this could be vehicle specific, but in my case here, it's performed a lot better than some of the other head units that I've had in this vehicle. What I mean by this is, see the volume control here? This is actually the OEM volume control knob, and in order to tell the head unit to turn up the volume, that has to occur over data. So if I turn this up, you can see that it's extremely responsive. I can go up, down, and you can see that it responds quickly there on screen. So overall, the head unit is extremely responsive. Now turning our attention to some of the other button options that we have that are physical buttons on the bottom of the screen here. They have the home button that always takes us back to this screen here. We can of course do volume up and volume down with these push buttons. We have a middle button, and this middle button is actually customizable, and in my case, I've made it a mute or an attenuation button. We also, of course, have our track forward and track back. And finally, there's the voice button here. In my case, I'm connected to Android Auto, so this is going to open my Android Assistant. Play I Had Some Help by Post Malone on Spotify.
Okay, I Had Some Help by Post Malone. Here it is on Spotify.
Now, speaking of Android Auto, don't forget that you can, of course, also use Apple CarPlay, and both Android Auto and Apple CarPlay connect wirelessly to this unit. And I found that the unit's startup time was always super fast, really what I would expect for a modern head unit, and it would connect to my phone with no issues. Now, of course, with Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, you're going to be able to use navigation and other common car features. And again, you can see how responsive this screen is. I can zoom in and out by using the pinch to zoom functionality. Again, super responsive, just like any other vehicle screen like you would expect. Returning to the home screen here, we have this button which allows us to launch all of the apps, and you can see that this gives us a quick and easy way to select all of the different inputs that we mentioned are available on this head unit. Better yet, if we would like, we can easily customize the ones that are readily available here. Let's say that I want to move the gauges, and let's say that I want quick access to vehicle info. It's as simple as that. Now we have that on the bottom of the screen. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the fact that this head unit talks to the data signal of the vehicle is very important, and it also allows us to retain features like the steering wheel controls. You can't see it because it's off screen right now, but I'm pressing up and down on the volume control just to show that that works, along with the different skip functions and mode select functions. Another obviously important feature to retain is the rear backup camera, and I wanted to show you guys this. They do have a ton of adjustability here in how we can adjust the guidelines that are overlaid from the aftermarket screen here. So I'm going to perfectly line those up with the stock projection there. And if I want to, I could actually turn them off altogether and just rely on these stock ones. It's worth noting when I adjust my climate control features down below, that's going to pull up the climate control screen. And if your vehicle has parking assist and other features built in, you'd be able to access those here. Let's take a look at the radio screen here. We of course have the ability to select between AM and FM stations, but what I really like is how easy it is to save a preset. Let's say I've tuned into 101.1 here, and I want to save it to this preset. Just click and hold, and there it is. And now we can easily cycle between all of our different presets or simply select them on screen. The vehicle info screen simply gives us information about the vehicle. Right now I have the hood open, so you can see that on screen. If I open up my driver's side door, You can see that the head unit knows that as well. And again, this screen here is going to depend on the vehicle that you're installing into if you have the ability to connect to the data signal with the aftermarket head unit. USB allows us to connect a memory stick and use it as a source with audio files loaded on it. A similar case for Bluetooth. In this case, we would connect our phone, but if we are connected through Android Auto or CarPlay, we're going to connect via that for wireless connections instead. Rear camera gives us access to our rear backup camera. Settings is the settings for the head unit. We're going to come back to that. HDMI allows us to play a video source through the head unit. Camera 1 and camera 2 can be used as separate camera feeds that you could have on an auto trigger if need be. With the phone button, if we were connected just via Bluetooth, we'd be able to control some basic functionality of our phone so that we don't have to actually use it when we're in the vehicle. It's kind of a hands-free option, if you will. But in this case, since I am connected to Android Auto, if I click it, it's going to open up the phone screen of Android Auto. Devices is where I can choose which devices I would like to add and their priority for the head unit. Sirius XM would be our satellite radio. And finally, gauges. Again, this is installation dependent, but you can see this gives us some access to some of the other vehicle metrics. Now, when it comes to installing an aftermarket head unit, customization is key, so let's talk about some of the different settings inside here. First off, in settings, we can again access that device connection screen, but something else that's really valuable is the ability to fine-tune the sound coming out of this head unit. Here we can turn on the EQ, and you can see they give us some options of some different factory type EQ situations here. But if we did want to set our own EQ, we can easily do that just by clicking our finger or even dragging like I am right now on screen. This is a 14-band EQ, and you can see that we can also select a particular frequency and go up and down with the arrows there. Do keep in mind that this EQ affects the system as a whole. If we don't save our EQ settings, when we back out, it's going to ask us if we would like to, but in my case, I don't want to. Let's go back here and turn it off. We're going to leave the EQ flat for the time being. Now, if we have an aftermarket amp powering a subwoofer and we are feeding it the signal from this aftermarket head unit, we can of course also control the subwoofer level in this screen here, and we can even turn that output on and off. Like most head units, you're going to have the ability to fade front to rear, also balance left to right as needed. And something really neat about this head unit is it has the ability to set some initial time alignment based on the listening position. So you can see they have a front setting, a front left setting, a front right. The idea here being that you're optimizing for a particular seat in the vehicle. You could do all, or you could do your own custom setting here by custom measuring to each speaker location and putting in those different values. For you metric guys out there, they also give us the ability to easily switch to centimeters if we would like. Or if you'd like to turn off time alignment altogether, you can do that as well. Finally, we have the ability to control some crossover settings on this head unit. We can choose for the front, the rear, or the subwoofer channels. Let's look at the front as an example, and let's say that we turn on a high pass filter and we put it at 63 Hertz. We can also control the slope of that filter. And on the subwoofer, we could do a low pass filter. Let's do 63 again. And in this case, let's do negative 24 dB. And we can also control the phase. We can do normal or reverse. Or if we don't want the crossovers to be enabled at all, we can of course always turn them off. So overall, quite a bit of flexibility on the sound controls there. Now next up, we also have the ability to customize this unit. And remember I mentioned earlier that this center button can be customized. Right now I have it on mute, but we could also enable it to do a source change. So let's do that. You can see it switch to Android Auto, radio, etc. Now in terms of wallpaper, that's going to be the background that you see on the home screen. So they've got this wood look, they have kind of this yellow vinyl look and like a blue fabric look. But if you would like, you can also upload your own images via the USB port that you could use as the background. I'm going to leave it on this blue setting for the time being, hit OK there, and if we go to the home screen, there you can see it. Now moving on from our customization, the next section here is application, and this is where where I was able to do some of those camera adjustments that we were talking about earlier. You can control some functionality of the Sirius XM module, and in my case here, since we have a Maestro module as part of this installation, we can access the settings for it in this menu. We can control the input level, but this is really important. We can also go into Maestro settings, and here is where we can access vehicle features, vehicle settings, and this is where we can dive into some more of the OEM customization options that existed on the OEM head unit. In this case, this is where we could edit our door keypad code. That's something we would normally have to do on the factory head unit, but now since we have the Maestro module that is talking to the data signal of the vehicle, we can do it through these menus here. The Maestro module also has several different features that we can fully use to control the vehicle settings. Finally, if we go into our system settings here, this is where we can change things like the language, the date and time. We could turn on demo mode if we wanted to. We have steering wheel settings, which is really cool. We can actually map each of the different steering wheel options to do something different if we would like. We can turn off that little beep noise that you guys are hearing constantly when I make a selection on the screen, or we can turn it back on. With volume settings here, we can independently control some of the different tones and things that occur, like the phone call volume. This is really advantageous for when you're adding aftermarket amplifiers to the system. We can choose the audio output channel between the front and the rear when we're doing calls or guidance or prompts. We have the ability to modify some of the dimmer settings. We can turn off the illumination on the keys down here at the bottom if we would like. We can also change the brightness if we feel that those are too bright. We can tell the head unit our driver's position in the vehicle if we had a right-hand drive vehicle. The head unit has some adjustable parameters based on the cabin size for the included microphone. And then from here, we're really getting into some more of the fine details associated with the unit. So in summary, if you're looking for an amazing sounding aftermarket head unit that's going to allow you to add all of the latest technology to your vehicle, you're definitely going to want to check out the Sony XAV-AX8500. If you'd like to learn more and purchase yours, check out the links down in the video description. A special thanks to Sony for sponsoring this video, and thank you guys for tuning in and watching.